Local stories, local people. We're taking you inside Western Mass news. It's the Even Better Western Mass podcast with Dave Madsen.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. My guest this week is Rick Sullivan, Jr. He's the president and CEO of the Western Mass Economic Development Council. The EDC, a private nonprofit corporation that provides resources and information to businesses operating in or entering the region by aiding in expansion, relocation, and networking. His long career has taken him from Westfield Mayor to Governor Deval Patrick's Chief of Staff. Rick and I talk about his career and his optimism as he works with local businesses and companies in the recovery from the COVID-19 shutdown. I think a lot of people have heard about the council, but just as some background, what's its mission?
Sure. So the Economic Development Council is a membership-based organization. It's the largest companies, the largest employers. It's the companies that really drive the Western Massachusetts economy. The board and the membership is really made up of the highest level of business owners or company presidents, CEOs. And the theory is, and it really stems back out from the Plan for Progress some 25 years ago and coming out of, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission and then Governor Weld, that recognized the fact that each region of the state had a different economy. And the business leaders at the time agreed with that and said, if we're really going to move the Western Massachusetts economy, we need to get together as a group and support all of the different initiatives that are important for economic development. And that's everything from public education to transportation, energy policy. Today, the biggest issue is clearly workforce and workforce development. It has evolved over time. At some points in its history, it was really a almost development company working with West Mass Development and Westover Development, who are affiliates of ours, and really did and was responsible for all of the industrial parks in Western Massachusetts, really developed by West Mass, to be clear, which actually preceded the EDC. So it goes back to the 85 members. When we, have our meetings and chart a course, that's the business voice. And so the governor, the secretaries of economic development, labor, education, they know that they can go to the EDC and take the pulse, if you will, or find out what's important to the business community, the big business community in Western Massachusetts. We are not, a chamber, although the Springfield Chamber and the East of the River Chambers are affiliates. They certainly have an agenda and a legislative agenda and, go and speak loudly for the tax shifts at the local level. And we try to help each other and not certainly not compete with each other. But we are kind of that larger voice, that convening voice. And I think, we've moved in that direction.
Rick, we're 3 months into this, the COVID-19 shutdown, I guess, for lack of a better word. What's the state of business in Western Massachusetts right now? Where, from your assessment?
So I think it certainly depends on what sector you're talking about. The manufacturers, I'll say for the most part, there certainly are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, the manufacturers have continued to operate. They've mostly all essential businesses. So that they have been able to, move forward and, are indicating that their flow of work is good. The biggest issue that many of them have is trying to find enough employees to work the shifts. So that will continue to be a problem. But without a doubt, the restaurants, the travel and tourism industry, certainly the casinos and Six Flags are attractions, venues, are very slow, and many of them are suffering. The cities and towns have put out some programs. The state, certainly, the federal government with PPP have all come out with programs to try to help people to get from the beginning of COVID till out. But without a doubt, it's slow for them. And unfortunately, I think some of the smaller businesses probably are not going to be able to come out of it just because of the financial burdens to that. So it really kind of depends. I think longer term, which we can get to later if you want, I think is actually, I'm very optimistic about the future for Western Massachusetts because we're positioned, we're less dense. We have a lot of open space. Our cost of living is much less. Our cost of doing business is less. Our quality of life is great. It was certainly centered around outdoor activities. And so all of a sudden, that type of working from home, people want to be able to live in that and have that quality of life. All of a sudden, Western Massachusetts is actually attractive for that. So as people get used to working from home or telecommuting, or maybe they only have to go into Boston or New York once a week or once every couple of weeks, and they can live in Western Massachusetts. So we are seeing some interest on a couple of fronts. We have about 42 site searches going on right now. And let me be clear, a lot of those will end up becoming really nothing, but people are looking, which is a good indicator for Western Mass, about locating or growing their businesses out here just for that reason. We are also seeing companies, particularly in manufacturing, looking at their supply chains and saying, I don't know that I want to be reliant on a company in China or Asia someplace or overseas. So they're looking at onshoring for Massachusetts businesses or even New England and Northeast. Western Massachusetts has a lot of quality manufacturers that would fit into people's supply chain. So it will create, I think, an opportunity for real growth. So I'm actually optimistic that, coming out of COVID, which is not going to be tomorrow, but coming out of COVID, I think the future is actually bright for the Western Mass economy.
That's good. That's good news on all fronts for sure. Now, we can get back to that, but let's talk about how the council is helping these businesses, small and large, during this COVID-19 pandemic.
Sure. So we've done, kind of everything, things that we really wouldn't have ever thought we were going to be doing. So early on, we went to our membership and encouraged the business community in general to, if they, like schools of higher education, if they were not going to go back into session at the end of the school year, they had PPE, protection equipment as part of their inventory. Could they donate that to the hospitals in particular, but first responders? So many of our companies stepped up and emptied their shelves. Manufacturers, handed over safety goggles and those types of things, which worked early on because there just was a huge problem in getting PPE. We helped source some PPE for companies, and we continue to try to help facilitate that, although that has slowed down some. And then we kind of pivoted to the PPP program at the federal level. And I just want to give a shout out to the local banking community and the accountants and the lawyers, financial advisors. They really took that program here locally and made it work within about a 24 to 48 hour period, because the federal government said, hey, we've got money, but they were really light on the details and the procedures. So, the banks in particular, many of whom are my members, really stepped up and worked around the clock for a couple of days to get that program up and running. So we helped facilitate companies that were perhaps not able to access PPP for whatever reason the first time around, and connect them. And that's really what we do. We don't run those programs, but we kind of act as a convener. And certainly, the chambers have done similar things as well. They've all got COVID teams, and actually my board chair, Kevin Van, just yesterday put together formally, we had it in place anyway, but formally recognized the fact that we've got a COVID response team. So if companies are having problems connecting into these programs or these resources, we can act as a convener or can do those connections for people. And we've certainly helped companies that perhaps weren't recognized early on as essential businesses. So we helped through the state process to get them recognized so that they could stay up and running. And now that there's a phasing plan for the Commonwealth, a couple of companies in particular are concerned of where they fall in that phasing plan, and at least would like to have an audience to kind of explain what safety protocols they've got in place and could they move up into that phasing program. So again, it's just the connections and being able to have a conversation with, in that case, the Secretary of economic development. So we serve that role many times behind the scenes. And we're good with that, and my board is very happy to be behind the scenes and make those connections. And the belief is if the economy in Western Massachusetts is doing better for everybody, then a rising tide raises all boats, and all our companies here will be doing better if the local economy is doing well.
I mean, it's got to be overwhelming for these businesses, small and large. All of a sudden in March, it's like, okay, we're shut down. We've got to shift our business module to try to stay just try to keep their heads above water. So you're basically kind of holding their hand and taking them through the process, it sounds like.
We're at least connecting them into the process and then
Yeah.
trying to help them through it. Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to do it. Again, we don't run those programs, but we certainly have the expertise sitting around our board table, and our board has been hugely giving in terms of their time and their talent and their company resources. Because again, for the most part, it's the bigger companies, it's the Mass Mutuals and the Big Ys and the Bay States and the Trinities. And they have the resources and the talent on their staffs to be able to help, and they're always willing to come to the table and help somebody out. In fact, at our strategic planning, our plan was adopted yesterday, and one of the programs that we're going to be running is called an anchor institution program. And really, it asks, and there will be a commitment that's made by the companies that they will, when they hire, they will look to hire locally. When they have opportunities in their supply chain, they will look to fill those opportunities locally with other local companies. And then when they're making place-based investments, they will be looking to do those in our local communities. So the theory is that if we help each other, in the region, we'll have a stronger economy, and that'll create other opportunities for growth as well.
Your political career started in Westfield as mayor, then you went to the Department of Conservation and Recreation and Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs to Governor Patrick's Chief of Staff. So you've seen the whole state.
I did. It only proves I can't keep a job, Dave.
But I think you can. But beyond that, so from what you've seen, what makes, and I think we've touched on a little bit, what makes Western Mass so special? I mean, you've come back home.
I did come back home, and actually I never left. I commuted from Westfield to Boston every day for 7.5 years. So I also got to know the Turnpike pretty well. I think that there's just the people, I think that there's a real collaborative gene. And part of that may be because we recognize that in terms of the state, we're relatively small in terms of population, and we have to work together. And that's just, pretty amazing when you don't see that in other places in the Commonwealth, quite honestly. It's much more competitive in that sense. So I think that there's a genuine feeling that this is, a great place to live and work, but we also all need to be working together. And then when you look at the quality of life, you certainly have to recognize the fact that, we're an environmentally conscious part of the Commonwealth. We have a lot of open space, a lot of recreational opportunities, and there's a certain level and a great quality of life here. And at the same time, we're geographically well located. That if you want the experience of a big city and some of the cultural opportunities that might be there that aren't here in Western Mass, you can be there in an hour and a half by car. We're very fortunate. We got a great, robust regional airport that when you look at the benefits of Western Mass, there's a lot of parts of the country that don't have, a 25-minute ride to an easily accessible international airport. So there's just a lot of quality of life issues that are very strong here. And, the cost of living, the cost of doing business are just less. And, back when I was Secretary of Environmental Affairs, I used to have meetings with companies all the time. And, if they were talking about moving part of their operations to another part of the state, they'd say, well, you can't compete. And it's like, well, you got to look. And I said, just because the end of our name says Massachusetts, we're not Cambridge, we're not Somerville, we're certainly not Boston. And I can be competitive. I might not be able to deliver the absolute lowest cost electricity. I'm not going to be able to beat Oklahoma, but I can get, if you look at a municipal in particular, I can be competitive in Western Mass, and I can certainly have the workforce, a well-educated workforce, particularly in the sectors of manufacturing. So we've got a lot to offer. It's just always getting to that table to have that discussion and give us a chance to be competitive.
Let's talk about, the optimism about the future here. How big a role does this East-West rail play in really putting Western Massachusetts on the map and helping move forward?
Yeah, I think certainly anytime that you can make any kind of connection between your larger economic centers and where we are here in Western Massachusetts, that's a positive thing. I am a realist, and certainly the East-West, while it's moving forward, and we are members of the advisory council, as is the Chamber of Commerce, Nancy Creed from the Chamber of Commerce, and others from Western Mass. And that isn't going to happen tomorrow. I was very involved in the South Coast Rail Project, which has been around for decades as well, and that is just starting some construction in the last couple of years. So it's a very slow process, and I think people just need to be prepared for that. But anytime it's moving forward is a good thing. And I do think that with Congressman Neal sitting as the chair of Ways and Means, there is a reality that and a possibility that if there's a federal transportation bill of some type, investment of some type, that Western Massachusetts, if we're ready to go with a plan, could take advantage of that as well. I also think in terms of connections that, the state and federal government could make a significant investment in broadband and internet and get better communications connections here in Western Massachusetts, particularly to some of our smaller communities. And that could be a real economic development strategy for many of our particularly smaller communities, because again, people would be able to work from home and they could live in these communities that they wanted to have that type of quality of life. They wanted to live in a more rural or a less crowded part of the Commonwealth. And I think that there's going to be many opportunities in the future for people to telecommute and work from home even more than there are now. But if we're going to be able to do that and take advantage of it, we need to have that connection as well.
Yeah, it is interesting. This whole thing with COVID-19, it's proven that we can do things differently and work from home. We found it in the television industry too. That it is possible. And for many families with children especially, it's very appealing.
It is, it certainly creates, and it works for some companies, right? Particularly certainly some of the tech companies, the larger ones. You've seen the Googles and the Facebooks and those types of companies. But Mass Mutual is having their people stay home till at least September and be working from home. I know Liberty Mutual and others are starting to do the same thing. I got a daughter-in-law that works for Vistaprint. They're all working from home, and they even work internationally from home. So it can be done. It works for some sectors. I do think on a personal level, I miss the personal interactions, which I think are important. I kind of have built my career, I guess, with those personal relationships, and it's a little harder on Zoom type conferences to make those connections, but you can do the work. So I do think that there are some things in some sectors that are not necessarily going to go back to normal if you define normal as what it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole thing, and that's I'm sure part of what you're doing is, okay, let's help redefine this new normal and how we're going to deal with it.
Right, and that's what the strategic plan says. That actually we changed it right before we adopted it yesterday to reflect the fact that we've got COVID. So we need to get back to where we were and then better. And how do we do that? And I think it's taken advantage of, again, the opportunities that we see in supply chains and that we see in companies moving some of their operations out of the bigger cities and into back to people's homes, and that can all be done here.
I think the other thing too is you talk with anybody in business. As part of the podcast, spoke with a number of business people. Number one, we saw how quickly businesses can adapt and kind of shift their production. But number two, as far as moving forward, I'm guessing that the thing that's going to hold everything back here is not knowing where we're going with COVID-19 and the fact that, are we going to see a resurgence of this?
Yeah, and that's obviously a big unknown, and that's kind of almost impossible to plan for, right? Because everybody talks about a second wave, and I think certainly the medical professionals believe that there'll be some level of a second phase. And who knows when a real vaccine or even some treatments are going to be reliable enough to deploy. So, companies don't want to go and then fully get back and operational only to have to shut it all back down again, because that's hugely costly as well and really kind of counterproductive. So, I mean, I think everything is going cautiously. I think people are being really smart. I mean, I'll speak for Massachusetts in general. I think people are being smart about the reopening. I think they're being smart about how far down the road they're planning, and they, at least in the back of their heads, are anticipating that there could be some kind of a second wave or some need to modify even what they're doing today, in the future. And certainly the schools and the colleges and universities are really struggling to come up with a plan that works for everybody, but they're clearly thinking about some kind of a second wave coming later in the fall. So and again, higher ed, college, that's a big part of the Western Mass economy. We're fortunate here to certainly have the flagship university, but also all the other colleges and universities that are in the Pioneer Valley are a real calling card for us. I think in the future they're going to be even more important because they are developing and training the talent that businesses are need so badly. And you're starting to see companies make partnerships with all of our colleges and universities, on research and development, on workforce development, curriculum development, training. It's great to see, but that's an important part of our economy. So when the colleges and universities don't come back into session, that's a big hit to our local economy as well. Certainly in places like Amherst and Northampton and the other college communities, Springfield.
Yeah, we talk about that. You took me in the right direction with that. That we see the Springfields and Holyokes and Chickapees, but these smaller communities, East Hampton, Northampton, Amherst, that really are looking at these small businesses that are the impact on those. The fact that the students aren't in town right now and they haven't been for months. Just the long-term impact. I know there's things that we're feeling right now, but as you look 6 months down the road, almost like this. Like a snowball effect on this thing but again, you really can't tell.
No, you can't tell, but I mean, you're right. I mean, the parents come to, parents weekend or drop their kids off or just come for a visit. They're staying in the local hotels or they're going to the local restaurants. The kids, the students are out, they're buying things that they need. They're certainly, going to the local restaurants, probably a bar or two. And the professors that are there and the meetings they have and the people that come to visit on campus, it does just absolutely snowball. I know, again, just from even just the city of Westfield, the fact that Westfield State University didn't have their graduation, that impacts the meals tax and the room tax that is collected by the communities, and certainly at the state level as well. You're seeing it. I mean, they're indicating that they could be $4 billion or more less in revenues. Now, it's not all sales tax and room tax and meals tax, but some of it is. And, that is just that snowball that you talk about that, I think in a lot of ways we probably take for granted day to day because we don't necessarily see it. But it's important, and it's really important to those smaller businesses. I mean, even just having the downtowns, the office towers shut down, people aren't getting out of work and, stopping at the bar and having a drink on the way home or, grabbing something to eat at lunchtime or grabbing the flowers to take home. They're not there. So that isn't happening. And so that's an impact, again, that just keeps cycling back through the economy.
Is there any idea, and maybe it's too early for this, that in dollars and cents, the impact that this has had just in the first 3 months?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you on a dollars and cents. I know the state is definitely taking a look at it. I mean, I know on their budgets, most everybody's budget in terms of government was, looking really good for what would have been fiscal 20. And then this has just driven huge holes. And I mean, you're talking in the state level, you're talking billions of dollars that they're going to be short. And you get into the local communities, and it's obviously different for everybody. But now you're talking millions of dollars. So it's hugely impactful. And so it's going to be a really big number.
As we look at jobs too, I know one of the worries that many folks had with the the money that folks are getting from the government and unemployment and everything else, the challenge of getting people back to work. It's like, well, I've talked to a lot of people saying, well, I'm making more money than I was when I was working.
Yeah,
it's got to be a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to fall into the category somewhat of unintended consequences when they did put obviously a $600, I don't want to call it a bonus, but addition onto the unemployment. And so therefore, at least, I think most of that comes to an end, by the way, in July. So everybody needs to kind of watch that. But, assuming it's not renewed, that extra payment is going to go away. But that has been an issue. There are some people that certainly, are doing better on unemployment right now than they would be going back to work. There also are concerns that whether or not it's safe to go back to work, that I think some people have, real concerns about that. And then you have issues like transportation. People are not looking to get in, necessarily into a crowded bus or, in the eastern end of the state, the subway or the train, the T. And then you have daycare, which has been a problem that, many parents are just feeling like it's not safe to go take their child to the daycare. And, they've struggled with rules that kind of work on daycare. They have modified them again. But those are all issues that, again, pre-COVID, people had worked out in their own family lives, which, certainly got a monkey wrench thrown in, and there's a whole lot of those issues now that just aren't as clear cut as they were before.
Sure, I think a lot of that too must be, okay, the business plan we have for today will work to get us through this time, but it may not be good enough for us 3 months from now.
Absolutely. And, it's you can try to have a contingency plan for the unknown, but, not when you have no idea of what the unknown is.
Is there anything we can learn from this? I mean, my hope is, and that people I've spoken with before think, let's hope that we come out of this better than we were before we went into it.
So, I mean, I'm a big believer and always have been that, the private sector is pretty resilient and is really talented and creative and can pivot, right? And find a way to do things better, more efficiently, in many cases cheaper. And so, I mean, I think the fact that, many of the companies are looking at and have experienced now working from home, and many employees are actually liking that, that they're able to do that and work from home, and it works better for the quality of life. So is that an improvement or an enhancement, or at least part of their workforce will continue to do that into the future? I think that's probably a smart move for many businesses. Now, will it have a ripple effect? It absolutely will, because now all of a sudden they don't need to have a large, office presence. So that very well may impact commercial real estate prices and even availability. For everything that can change and maybe a better way to do business, there's going to be impacts to somebody that has to then pivot and figure out what to do. So I know the commercial real estate market and people are certainly watching this very closely, because that could be hugely impactful to what they do, not just here in Western Mass, but really across the state. And certainly when you get down to places like Boston, where, there's a lot of money tied up in commercial real estate down there. So I think, many companies will come out of this, leaner, more efficient, better business practices. I also think, kind of in a weird way, I think everybody has had to kind of re-examine on what's important in their lives, both from a family perspective and personally. What do you want your quality of life to be, both, your home life, but, also your work life. And, I think it's always important to have a balance, but I think people have been really reflective on a personal nature on exactly what this has meant to them. Again, some of us have lost colleagues, as a result of this. And, you kind of see that, hey, life, I know we always say it, and, life is short, celebrate every day. But, I think in some ways, people are going to keep that in the back of the mind. I think this has been really impactful for that. And again, I think in a positive way, that also bodes well for Western Massachusetts, because we have those things that I think are important. You have the ability to be outside and experience nature and outdoor recreation, and somewhat of a slower pace of life than you have in Boston. And you can spend time with your family and do things that are important. So it isn't necessarily all about business being better coming out of this. I think that there's also going to be a lot of personal betterment that occurs through all that reflection.
I think you've probably heard this too, that someone had told me that this is Mother Nature's way of saying you thought you were in control, but guess what? You're not.
Well, she always wins, right? So yeah, that you're absolutely correct. You're not in control of these things.
Now, as we look to the future, I mean, initially when we started the conversation, your optimism about Western Massachusetts and that we're going to come out of this thing all right.
Mm-hmm. I am. I mean, I'm very optimistic. I think a lot of the changes that are going to take place are going to, like I said, bode well for us. We've seen some manufacturers. I'll give you a Columbia Manufacturing in Westfield, which most of us know is the bike company, although school furniture is probably their number one product these days. They pivoted and started making, gowns for PPE, as well as nursing stations, what you see in the hospitals that you can, wheel from room to room. If you've been in the hospital, you've seen them. And they now have contracts with, some of the local hospitals here, and are looking for that to become a product line. And again, Columbia is a reliable manufacturer that who the people are. And so there's those opportunities. Those companies will need longer term contracts. They can't just pivot to make one order of PPE. It has to be a sustainable order. But I think that those are opportunities that are going to come. So some companies, as you had kind of alluded to before, had pivoted a little bit on what they were actually doing and what they were manufacturing. Again, we've seen other opportunities in people's supply chain, where the EDC is probably going to be running an event right now. It's scheduled for August, and having iRobot, who people would know as the Roomba, and they're going to come and specifically state where in their supply chains there's opportunities that they would look to Western Massachusetts manufacturers, but there's also potentially some opportunities around a call center that currently is overseas for them, that they would look to potentially onshore, and some other Boston area out of market companies that are prepared to do the same type of thing, and we can match them up with our manufacturers here in Western Massachusetts that can make that fit into that supply chain. So I think there's very significant real opportunities there to grow our local economy. And better than anybody else, it's those companies that are donating to the local charities and sponsoring the little league teams, and our local companies mean so much. They're a part of the fabric of our communities and who we are in Western Massachusetts. And if we can grow those and grow the presence and the success of those companies, that's just going to have a positive ripple effect through our economy.
It may not feel like it right now, but you think we're going to come out of this better and stronger than we were before?
I do. I mean, I don't want to just, be sounding positive for the sake of sounding positive, but I really think that there's opportunities there. I don't think they're just going to happen. I think we have to be strategic. I think we have to be purposeful in making the connections and, selling the region, and really getting to the table to make the case for Western Massachusetts. But that's kind of what the ultimate mission of the EDC is. And, I am, because, companies, the companies out of the region are at this moment in time reassessing how they do business and who's in their supply chain and how reliable that is. Cost to some point is always going to be an impact, but do they really need to have their call centers, overseas? Is it better for them? Is it more reliable for them? Safer to have that, close to home. And we would then argue have that here in Western Massachusetts.
One of these things too that I've seen this, and you really think with this. I mean, in my generation, the Kennedy assassination and 9/11, and now this. But this is different. But I've heard people say, what, if we can get through this, we can pretty much get through anything.
Yeah, I do think that everybody. I think the people probably of America, but keeping it to Western Mass, are pretty resilient, and they'll find a way to soldier through to get this. I mean, I think we're seriously taking the advice of the medical professionals. So I think we will do all of the smart things to get through it, and kind of believe, and we'll follow the science. So I think we'll get through it. And then I just think that there's that real opportunity to be stronger and better, and realize that we are a region. So we need Franklin County and Hampshire County and Hampden County to all do well. This isn't about any one community or any one company. This is really all of us, in this together, and we can all do better. And I think that kind of goes back to actually the very first question you asked me. I mean, what's special about the region? And it's like, that's the attitude that everybody has going in, is we're all in this together.
My thanks to Rick Sullivan for joining me on this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Now, for more information about the Western Mass Economic Development Council, visit westernmassedc.com. I'm Dave Mattson. Thanks for watching or listening to this week's edition of Even Better Western Mass. Stay well, and if you can, hope you'll join me next week.